For the briefest moment in the early 2010s, Stomp Clap ruled the airwaves. The Lumineers were vying for chart places with Rihanna and Bruno Mars. Mumford & Sons of Monsters and Men and Vance Joy too were getting rich off hoedowns, hootenannies and rave-ups. And everyone was dressed like they were in There Will Be Blood. It was a millennial-tinged Americana, Obama-era folk pop. A whole lot of stomping, clapping, hooting, hollering. It was nostalgia for the old times, infused with blinding sincerity, an absolute aversion to irony, and an overabundance of percussion. But what were its influences, the vital steps along the way, and how did we get to the point where Ho Hey was a pop hit? These are the 7 songs that made Stomp Clap happen. The music that Stomp Clap draws from, bluegrass and folk, dates back to the 1940s and way earlier respectively. But what made it relevant for listeners in the 21st century was a Depression-era comedy road movie directed by the Coen brothers. 2000's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou tells the story of 3 convicts on the run, and amongst other misadventures, gaining an unexpected radio hit. The film is part adaptation of Homer's Odyssey, part American music history lesson, taking in bluegrass, gospel, string band music, and old-time country, while also tipping the hat to the legend of blues player Robert Johnson, selling his soul to the devil.
What did the devil give you for your soul, Tommy?
Well, he taught me to play this here guitar real good.
Oh, son, for that you traded your everlasting soul?
Well, I wouldn't use it.
The Coens had been fans of vintage country and western since college, and the soundtrack was sketched out before the film had even been written. T-Bone Burnett, who'd worked with the Coens before on The Big Lebowski, was music supervisor, tracking down the perfect era-appropriate songs to tell their story. From Harry McClintock's Hobo Fantasy, Big Rock Candy Mountain from 1928.
And the cigarette trees, the lemonade springs where the bluebird sings in the Big Rock Candy Mountain.
To the traditional prison work song, Poe Lazarus, field recorded by the legendary folklorist Alan Lomax in 1959. Most tracks, though, were re-recorded by more contemporary artists like Alison Krauss, Gillian Welch, Chris Thomas King, and child harmony group The Peaceful Sisters. However, the song with which George Clooney's thrown-together band The Soggy Bottom Boys became a statewide sensation was Man of Constant Sorrow.
I am a man of constant sorrow.
First published by Appalachian blind folk singer Dick Burnett as Farewell Song in 1913, though with many believing the song's origins may be centuries older. It was a reinterpretation by the Stanley Brothers in the 1950s that made the song a vital part of the country canon.
I am a man of constant sorrow.
Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Judy Collins, Rod Stewart, and Ginger Baker have all recorded variations. T-Bone Burnett had previously pushed the Stanley Brothers version for Lebowski, but it ended up suiting the character's troubles in Oh Brother much better.
The place where I was born and raised.
The version we used for our template was the version the Stanley Brothers had done, with 2 singers answering the last line of every verse.
The place where he was born and raised.
Which is, of course, comedic and paradoxical, as the tune is about a tore-down, blown-out cat, with these other voices attesting to the veracity of his tragic state of affairs.
He has no friends to help him now.
Somehow, the song captured the tone of the movie, epic and dead serious on the one hand, and comic and affable on the other. Though Clooney had attempted to sing the track, he claims he sounded just terrible, and so was replaced on the record by Alison Krauss and the Union State guitarist, Dan Tyminski. The surviving Stanley brother, Ralph, appears elsewhere on the soundtrack, singing a haunting a cappella of the traditional folk song, Oh Death.
Oh, death. Oh, death.
The film did okay. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was not a box office smash, but oddly its soundtrack was. With little radio airplay because who was playing 30s bluegrass on the radio, In the US, it ended up topping the soundtrack, country, and Billboard 200 album charts, and sold over 8 million copies. It also beat Outkast's Stankonia to Album of the Year at the Grammys in 2002. Afterwards, bluegrass, acoustic country, and banjos had a resurgence. The musicians from Oh Brother sold out package tours. Billboard introduced the Bluegrass Albums chart, where Nickel Creek got the first #1 album that wasn't the Oh Brother soundtrack with This Side. And Young Guns' Old Crow Medicine Show fleshed out an old Bob Dylan demo and became inescapable with their Americana-modelled new standard, Wagon Wheel.
Rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel.
Arcade Fire was formed by Win Butler and his friend Josh Dew in Montreal, Canada in 2001. Butler, an American, met Dew via a mutual friend while attending Sarah Lawrence College in New York. The two decided to move to Boston, spending the next 2 years honing their songwriting chops before Dew decided to return to his home in Montreal. Butler followed. After a couple of false starts, it was when he met the daughter of Haitian refugees, Regine Chassaing, that things started to coalesce. She was into jazz, Bach, and medieval instrumentation, and her creative arrangements perfectly disrupted Butler's fate as just another uninspired indie rocker. The group were off-kilter from the start, augmenting standard bass guitar and drums with accordion, violin, keyboards, xylophone, and brass. The lineup too was fluid, sometimes ballooning to 10 members on stage, though almost always including multi-instrumentalist Richard Reed Parry and snare-tossing musical anarchist Win's younger brother, Will Butler. All would be dancing, shouting to the sky and swapping instruments amongst the thunderous post-punk wall of sound they'd constructed from blood, sweat and tears.
Us kids know.
Some people get so rabid at our shows. They get these cathartic experiences, and they'll say it too. We saw you that time at so-and-so, and it was the best thing we ever saw, which does give me a twinge of pride. That's what I always wanted at a rock show. To sweat and cry and scream a lot. After their debut self-titled EP in 2003, Dew left and the band collapsed. The remaining members would regroup and record sporadically over the next year, resulting in their 2004 debut album, Funeral. The title was in reference to the spate of band family members passing as the album neared completion. But this was no mourning of loss. This was about bringing people together via full-throated emotion and tales about kids stuck in snow-log cities.
Then our skin gets thicker from living out in the snow.
In many ways, it was the conceptual Bleeding Heart show of Neutral Milk Hotel. But with the references to Anne Frank's Ghost replaced by the diverse big music orchestration of Echo and the Bunnymen's Ocean Rain. The album's centerpiece is Wake Up. Huge drums and massive guitars, the bed with which Butler sees the disappointment of growing up.
Our bodies get bigger, but our hearts get torn up.
It is the moment where Butler's oblique metaphors slip away. Words no longer exist to express his feelings. Instead supplanted by the full band singing in unison its rapturous chorus. Funeral allowed indie rock music to delve deep into the big subjects of love and death, at the same time when the new rock revolution groups were more than happy singing about drinking, partying, and getting laid. The thing that interests me is singing about the things that you're not supposed to sing about in rock, finding simple ways to articulate difficult, complicated feelings. You get so tired of music and film and culture when ideas are not expressed. And if you care about things and you're part of pop culture, it's important that you have ideas in your music about something not to do with how you're bought and sold. Otherwise, you're just joining in with all the rubbish. Before the September 2004 release of Funeral, their growing Montreal fanbase aside, Arcade Fire were basically unknowns. A florid pre-release review of the album on Pitchfork, Best New Music and rated a 9.7, would make it so that independent label Merge would find it hard to keep the album stocked in record stores for the first few months. By the end of 2005, they were turning down major labels left and right, had acquired famous fans in David's Bowie and Byrne, and U2 were using Wake Up for their Vertigo tour Walk On music. The album's fourth single, Rebellion Lies, was even a top 20 hit in the UK. Allegations of sexual misconduct directed at Win Butler in 2022 have since fractured their legacy, but for a brief moment in 2005, Arcade Fire were the band that was gonna save rock and roll. Many others took notes, now aware that the usually introverted indie rock scene could be big, bold and bombastic, but others preferred the easy route, taking the non-standard instrumentation, the surfeit of members, and Wake Up's euphoric cool, a moment where Funeral's emotions spilled over into a wordless outpouring, and made that simply a gimmick they could fashion a song around. A lot of haze and O's, but little substance. At the same time of Arcade Fire's Funeral, a brace of indie folk acts were accumulating buzz on the online music blogs, as the maximalist New Rock Revolution groups ate up most of their attention in the first half of the decade. Indie folk offered a quieter, more introspective counterpoint, taking cues from Elliott Smith, Will Oldham, and Neutral Milk Hotel.
Eyes wide open. It's like golden corn.
Oh my love, oh it was a funny little thing.
I know you have a heavy heart. I can feel it in the morning at the top of the stairs when your father found out.
And amongst this emerged a real-life mountain man. In 2005, Justin Vernon moved with his band, Diamant Edison, from the wintry climes of northern Wisconsin to the more humid North Carolina. He'd been in the band since he was a teenager, but after years of going nowhere, this was the kind of shake-up they needed to climb out of obscurity.
And I'm pancaked on the floor, you can't see my face.
Vernon hated the move, the heat, and having to work a kitchen job on the side to make rent. He also suffered through sequential bouts of pneumonia, mono, and then a liver infection as a result of the mono, his body rejecting his current situation. And when he did get to do band stuff, the band seemed uninterested in his ideas. His whole life was collapsing around him. I think that musically I realized I was compromising a lot. It wasn't anybody else's fault but mine. I had compromised so much for so many years. And on a personal level too, I'd compromised a lot. Not morals, but just thoughts in general. For 5 or 6 years there, I went from where I really thought I had purpose, and something to do and to give or to be, and to feeling really mediocre. It was like a weird spiraling mediocrity thing. And so he left the band, broke up with his girlfriend, and broke with civilization at large, spending the winter of 2006-07 alone in his father's cabin in the wilds of Wisconsin. There he attempted to straighten out his head, occupying himself by hunting deer, chopping wood, and drinking beer. At some point he remembered he had his guitar and some recording equipment in his car, so he brought it inside the cabin and started exercising spirits of romances past, trying to work out where he kept going wrong. It's centered around an ancient, long-lost love. But as happens in people's lives, old relationships often have plenty to do with new relationships as they come along. A lot of the album is about me trying to grow up, about trying to grow into new love and failing at it. It's telling a story of one last relationship and how other ones collided with it. Previously, Vernon had aspired to be Springsteen or Bob Dylan, but being away from everything, not having his standards to fall back on. His touchstones were more elemental. Choirs, Appalachian folk music, the literal sound of the mountains. His voice came out in a previously untapped falsetto, which he bolstered by layering multiple takes, the words slipping out of his subconscious. Arrangements were sparse. On Skinny Love, it was just him and his increasingly frenetic guitar.
Come on, skinny love, just let's sing it.
Various stomps to keep time on his impassioned dissection of a malnourished relationship.
And now all your love is wasted, and then who the hell was I?
Come March 2007, Vernon was ready to get back to reality, though it took him a while to realise that maybe he should release his Lo-Fi Cabin Sessions as an album. In July, he placed the tracks on MySpace and self-released a run of 500 copies, naming the album For Emma Forever Ago. Rather than using his name, he released it as Bon Hiver, a mishearing of the French phrase for good winter, which he'd encountered watching Alaska set comedy drama Northern Exposure.
Holling, it's starting to snow.
Yeah. Isn't that nice?
Bon Hiver, Holling.
Bon Hiver, Ed.
Because of the emotionality of the songs and the story that came with it, music blogs were instantly besotted with the album, Pitchfork rating it an 8.1 and placing it in their top 50 albums of 2007. Due to this increased interest, For Emma would receive a wider release through indies Jag-Jaguar and 4AD in 2008. By the end of the year, he had showcased his woodsy indie folk on Later with Jules Holland in the UK and David Letterman in the US, and was well on his way to going gold in both territories. And while the album sold well for an indie release, its influence was instant. It was the moment open mic nights went from acoustic alt-rock and ironic Hagar covers to bearded, knick-capped men attempting the raw authenticity of Skinny Love. Vernon, though, was stifled by the success, and as soon as 2009's Blood Bank EP attempted to banish the Mountain Man connection, bringing in more post-rock, yacht rock, and aggressive autotune to his original minimalist folk. However, once something becomes successful, soon enough someone less squeamish about being in the spotlight is going to clone it and cash in. Alex Ebert was a former major label casualty. In 2002, around the time the Big Three were looking for their own version of The Strokes or Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Ebert's dance punk combo I'm a Robot was picked up by EMI. Problem was that they never had a last night or maps. Ebert stalked the stage like a napalm-hearted cheater, but grew frustrated that the powers that be demanded he write hits. After 2006's Monuments to the Masses continued to do nothing, they were freed from their contract. But addiction and the band's non-success weighed on him, until he broke from his cycle. He felt beaten down by playing this role on stage, this unsmiling rocker, unfeeling and sarcastic, because that was what was deemed cool at the time. So to combat this, he rebuilt himself, reverting to a place of innocence, to childhood, and his first introductions to music. His dad's Willie Nelson, Vangelis, and Ennio Morricone records. So he threw away his phone, bought a bus from Craigslist, and hired perhaps too many people to be his new band, replacing I'm a Robot's cold cynicism with a warmer, more positive vibe. His new project was Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. Their 2009 debut, Up From Below, was a lo-fi remake of 60s psychedelic pop, with a melange of brass, tambourines, clapping, and off-key shouts. Ebert himself, no longer a punk, but their natural enemy, a hippie. This turncoat move knocked the music press's noses out of joint. Pitchfork gave the album a 4.1, mostly because of this supposed inauthenticity. The group seemingly freak folk bandwagon jumpers, who stank of artifice. Ebert, a former dance punk, now dressed like hipster Jesus. I guess I must be putting something forth that warrants a thorough vetting of my personal authenticity, which is more than I can say for almost any other current musical act. Almost everyone is not pretending to be authentic in any regard, and no one ever questions Lady Gaga's authenticity. It's irrelevant, it's clearly dishonest, and clearly all for show. But the one aspect that the reviewer couldn't deny was the track Home.
Let me go home. Home is wherever I'm with you.
Is the kind of conversational country duet that Johnny Cash and June Carter used to make.
Got mad in a fever, harder than a pepper sprout.
With splotches of the Mouldy Peaches anti-folk tweeness. Also present is a spaghetti western edge. In fact, most of the non-standard elements of the song, the whistling, the stomping, the clapping, and the cold, broken victory of the horn intermissions, was inspired by Ennio Morricone. The remarkably sincere spoken word section at the Middle Eight was a late-stage addition, retelling the true story of when his whiskey-voiced duet partner Jade Castronos defenestrated herself.
Do you remember that day you fell out of my window?
I sure do. You came jumping out after me.
Ebert decided this was the perfect moment to take this song of friendship to the next level by revealing his love for her.
I was falling deeply in love with you.
Her flustered reaction completely genuine.
And I never told you till just now.
In 2010, Home was everywhere. It soundtracked advertisements for the NFL, Microsoft's attempt at the BlackBerry, Levi's, and a trailer for the Jonah Hill vehicle, Cyrus. Already burnt by the major label system, Ebert had no qualms leasing his work to the highest bidder. Since then, it has become a wedding first dance favourite, ever present on alternative radio, and more recently in 2025, has been dubbed the worst song ever made.
Hey.
Alabama, Arkansas, I sure love my mom and pop, not the way that I do love you.
Part of this is because of the now cloying, unguarded optimism of the track, and naivety that everything could be okay. But mostly, people hate it due to its part in forming the stomp clap moment, a designation that Ebert embraces, and sees as an essential part of music history's ebb and flow. Really, stomp clap is like the monstrous answer to the monstrous hypocrisy of rock and roll, where you had the orthodoxy of non-conformity, but no one wanted to realize that, because it was so safe. I mean, what a nice convenience to be thinking that you're being unsafe, while being perfectly safe. To feel like you're rebellious, while you're not at all. To feel like you're part of a counterculture that is just the culture. Meanwhile, the UK was brewing its own modern take on the Greenwich Village scene, revolving around the Bosun's Locker on the King's Road in London. A bunch of teenage musicians bonded over the venue's country nights and underage drinking. Amongst this, Laura Marling was the obvious talent, writing wise beyond her years kitchen sink dramas about love and loss.
I will never love a man, 'cause love and pain go hand in hand, and I can't do it again.
Around her, bands like Noah and the Whale and the Vaccines would form.
When we were drinking, it was fun, fun, fun. When we were drunk and it was break-up sex that helps you forget your ex.
As well as IPA, drama was on tap. Marling had previously been guitarist for Noah and the Whale, dating the Whale himself, Charlie Fink, before breaking up and ending up with her touring drummer, Marcus Mumford. Songs about the triangle would pervade the scene. In December 2007, Mumford would form his own group from locker regulars and old school friends, naming them Mumford & Sons. He had been writing songs since school after falling in love with Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, but changed tact when he was gifted a copy of the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack, taking on bluegrass as his new religion. Mumford & Sons brought in double bass, banjos and acoustic guitars. Their name's supposed to evoke the image of an old-fashioned, family-run essential store. Their music to be just as rustic, wholesome and necessary.
Darkness is a harsh term, don't you think?
Their wardrobe followed suit, giving the impression of 19th century railroad engineers, though Mumford admits it began with him wearing a waistcoat to disguise his developing gut. After releasing a couple of indie EPs in 2008, their first proper single was August 2009's rabble-rousing two-step, Little Lion Man. Stinging regret bursting out of Mumford's chest during the chorus.
But it was not your fault but mine, and it was your heart on the line.
The stomping whisper to a saw middleweight gives the impression of Come On Eileen, if Dexys were more into bluegrass than northern soul.
Come on, Eileen, to the right, come on.
Two R's replaced with almighty R's. What's interesting is it was their first single-shaped song, and they knowingly kneecapped it for radio, with the dozen or so expletives in the chorus, despite industry types begging them to change it.
I already fucked it up this time, didn't I, my dear?
In their eyes, no other word could work for just how wrong he'd gone. Their debut album, Sigh No More, was self-funded, made without label backing, and produced by Marcus Draves, who had previously worked on Arcade Fire's Neon Bible. Having heard their EPs, Draves understood that their sound could be huge. What I heard was amazing dance music. I wanted to retain the urgency of that on record. Who says bluegrass belongs in a spittin' sawdust bar? If you make it sound as fat sonically as hip-hop, you can fill an arena easy. Sigh No More was released on Ireland in the UK in October 2009, followed in the US in February 2010. On Premium Indie, Glassnote. It soon went 5 times platinum in the UK, won British Album of the Year at the Brit Awards, and Taylor Swift covered their White Blank Page on her BBC Radio 1 session.
Tell me now, where was my fault?
In the US it sold 3 million copies, and they were nominated for Best New Band and Best Rock Song for Little Lion Man at the 2012 Grammys. While they didn't win either, they performed The Cave at the ceremony, before backing Bob Dylan himself, along with the Avett Brothers, on a version of Maggie's Farm. Critically though, they were slaughtered. Pitchfork gave the album a 2.1, going hard on the angle that they are a quartet of privately educated Brits playing dress-up, that they lacked the required legitimacy to be playing Dust Bowl country. A man of no little insecurity, Mumford felt they nailed everything he hated about his own work. Actually, the week the album came out, I read 2 reviews and I cried. I hated it. I thought, fuck, that's pretty bad. But that night I was playing a gig, and by the end of the gig I thought, well, we're still doing what we want to be doing, and we're really proud of the work we've done. And now we've made the decision as a band not to send reviews to each other. In all seriousness, it can affect how you feel. By 2011, Stomp Clap was gathering momentum. Of Monsters and Men formed in 2009 in a small town in Iceland. The next year, the folk rock 5-piece gained attention in their homeland after winning the National Battle of the Bands, Music Tilraunir. Evolution of their sound came quickly. They rocked up their folk and added drums, keyboards, accordion, trumpet, and French horn, after frequently being talked over when playing shows. Their choice to sing in English was due to its sharp corners suiting their tales of myths and fairy tales, more than the more spherical Icelandic language.
Ship will carry our bodies safe to shore.
Seattle's KEXP were an early champion. In October 2010, broadcasting the band playing in their living room after seeing them at that year's Iceland Airways Festival. When the band released their debut album, My Head is an Animal, in their homeland in September 2011, it soon went platinum, over 3% of the island nation having bought in. But the month before, John Allers, DJ for Philadelphia's WRFF, started playing a demo version of Little Talks on his morning show. Soon, alternative radio couldn't get enough of the track.
Don't listen to a word I say.
A boisterous, almost pirate jig with hearty haze. The main lyrical thrust of Little Talks was singer Nana Bryndis Helmersdottir's grandparents, how they still held hands, were very much still in love, and the song explores how they would cope when they didn't have each other anymore. It's about a couple and the husband passed away.
Well, tell her that I miss our little talks.
And it's from the conversation between the two of them.
You're gone, gone, gone away. I watched you disappear.
We don't know if she's going crazy or if someone's actually there.
Just let me go, we'll meet again soon.
Helped by a Single of the Week placement on iTunes and appearances on Jay Leno, Little Talks ended up at number 20 on the US Billboard chart, number 12 in the UK. When My Head is an Animal was re-released internationally in April 2012, it reached number 6 on the Billboard album chart, their highest ever placing for an Icelandic group. Soon they were able to soundtrack advertisements for Coca-Cola and Apple, and trailers for Ben Stiller movies. Critically, they fared less well. Pitchfork saw no reason to review their album. Others saw them as a radio-friendly gumbo of what had come before. Spin, Rolling Stone and The Guardian all compared them to Arcade Fire, while Billboard made a correlation between Little Talk's sweetly sincere duet with punctuating horns and the Magnetic Zero's Home. Others felt that their track Dirty Paws was even closer related. So much so that Alex Ebert almost got lawyers involved.
Of Monsters and Men. They got our album before they ever made an album because our agent was their manager and she showed it to them, and they basically got so close to home that we almost sued them. They were doing Apple commercials and I was getting calls saying congratulations. Like, that's how closely people started doing this.
The origins of the Lumineers began in the half-decade Wesley Schultz and Jeremiah Freites spent trying to make it in Brooklyn, New York. Schultz in particular was working barista and bartending jobs concurrently to afford to pay rent in the city, at the same time at open mic nights, and playing Bob Dylan and Coldplay covers in bars. Attention was not forthcoming. They briefly went by the name Free Beer in the hopes that more people might check them out. The few originals they sprinkled into their sets were met with audiences disappearing to the bar, or like with Of Monsters and Men, simply talking over their acoustic compositions. By 2009 they'd had enough and moved to Denver, to a scene that was a bit more receptive. But already they had Ho Hey, the song that would make them, itself inspired by those indifferent Brooklyn crowds. The initial spark was the idea that if the bar wasn't paying attention, maybe shout until they do. As such, the song's titular hollers were added as a live gimmick. Taking for themselves the rhythmic yells of the traditional work song, Take This Hammer, which they'd heard covered by the Felice Brothers.
Take this hammer and carry it to the captain.
While its refrain might suggest a love song, and indeed the song would get plenty of play at weddings.
I belong with you, you belong with me, my sweetheart.
It's a song dwelling on dissatisfaction.
I've been trying to do it right. I've been living a lonely life.
Looking back, I was writing about 2 heartbreaks at the same time. A person had recently broken up with me, and I was also leaving New York and moving to Denver, breaking up with the city that I thought held all my dreams. I felt steamrolled by both events.
I don't know where I went wrong.
with their lineup rounded out with cellist Naila Pekarek, recruited through an ad on Craigslist. The band soon got a management deal to fund the recording of their debut self-titled album, full of similarly spirited campfire sing-alongs. Pitchfork again didn't even consider reviewing it, but elsewhere they got a lot of comparisons to Mumford & Sons, the Civil Wars, and the Avett Brothers, not only for their Depression-era sound, but also their Daniel Plainview attire. However, before the album was even released, an acoustic version of Ho Hey was used on the CW show Heart of Dixie. After that, DJs started playing the studio version, and it entered the Billboard Hot 100 in June 2012 at number 90. 6 months later, it peaked at number 3, behind only Bruno Mars and Rihanna. It was the moment where Stomp Clap became indisputably mainstream. Not that the Lumineers were aware of how big they'd become. I remember going back home to Denver after coming off of our tour, and the Globe was reacting to the music in a way we weren't aware of, because we were in this bubble. A friend of mine was like, "What's it like being in one of the biggest bands in the world?" I thought he was joking, but then I realized he was actually serious. We were getting exposed to so much more of the world than we realized, or were prepared for. It caught us a little off guard.
As you promised me.
Stomp Clap had its moment. However, it is a movement applied in hindsight. No journalist named it that. No industry people thought to consign it that way. It was a meme tweet that retroactively got applied to a certain ill-defined sound. In reality, a collection of Americana, new folk, and indie rock that has congealed into a sometimes cringy happening. But briefly, it changed the sound of pop radio. Avicii's Wake Me Up wouldn't sound like that without Mumford & Sons.
So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser.
Ditto Pitbull and Kesha's Timber, and American Idol 2012 winner Philip Phillips' Home.
I'm yelling timber, you better move, you better dance, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home.
Imagine Dragons even had a go.
So
in 2024, there was a strong case for the sound's revival. Noah Kahan had taken over radio with Stick Season. Shaboozie's A Bar Song Tipsy was part Jaquan, part The Lumineers. And British artist Miles Smith's Stargazing was powered by a familiar stomping, clapping, acoustic strum.
promise that you hold me close, don't let me go.
In February 2025, Carl Gordon posted We Will Never Die, a note-perfect parody of everything millennial and hipster in 2013. The sky-shouted harmonies, the extraneous percussion, and endless positivity.
'Cause we will never die.
Though critically derided and easy to make fun of, overall it was a moment that was endearingly heart and sleeve, that was set on getting everyone involved, whether that was dancing, clumping their feet, or slapping their hands together. It was music that brought people together, perfectly suited to the massive crowds indie bands were now playing at festivals like Coachella. Those wordless harmonies, those expertly utilized heys and woes, allowing for mass sing-alongs, without everyone knowing all the words. It was cringe, but for a brief moment it was an escape from reality. No wonder it's back. And that's why, like it or not, banjo rave-ups will never die. Thanks for watching. Do you feel like I missed anything? What tracks do you feel epitomized Stomp Clap Hey? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also share it with a couple of people? It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporters over on Patreon, All the Dust and Glass, and a very special thanks to Stephen Morrissey, though I don't think it's that one. And thanks to everyone else that supports me. And I'll see you in a few weeks' time for another look at the British charts.